Avoidants always crumble when you understand this truth about avoidant personality: you've been ghosted. Again. Or maybe they didn't vanish entirely, they just shrunk into themselves, withdrew emotionally, and left you feeling like you were chasing a ghost with a heartbeat. If you've ever been caught in the cycle with someone who seems terrified of closeness the second things start getting good, you're probably dealing with someone with avoidant tendencies. Now, here's the truth: they don't want you to know avoidants aren't actually strong. They just hide better. See, we tend to think that avoidants are these emotionally impenetrable forces. Detached, unbothered, mysteriously independent. But the reality, it's not strength. It's fear. A fear so deep they'd rather burn a connection to the ground than risk the vulnerability of being seen. Let me say that again: they push you away. Not because you're too much, but because you see too much. And that's what terrifies them. But here's the twist, and this is where the power flips. When you stop chasing, when you stop trying to be the exception, and when you calmly hold your standards instead of their chaos, that's when they crumble. Avoidants thrive on the imbalance. They're not used to someone who understands their pattern and refuses to play into it. They're used to someone doubting themselves, apologizing for wanting closeness, shrinking to keep the peace. But the moment you start seeing their behavior not as a reflection of your worth, but as a symptom of their fear, you disarm their entire strategy. You're no longer reacting, you're observing, choosing. And that throws them off. Because now you're not just someone trying to get close, you're someone who has seen through the armor and decided it's not good enough unless they step out of it. Avoidants don't crumble when you beg for connection. They crumble when you stop needing them to be the one. Avoidant behavior is often misunderstood as emotional strength or stoicism. Many people look at those with avoidant tendencies and think, wow, they've really got control over their emotions, or they're so independent and self-sufficient. But that's a misreading of the entire dynamic. What looks like strength is usually fear dressed up as distance. People with avoidant personalities aren't immune to emotion. They're actually overwhelmed by it. The difference is, instead of expressing vulnerability, they run from it. Their entire framework of relationships is built on a subconscious fear, the fear of being engulfed, of being controlled, or of being seen in a way that makes them feel exposed or inadequate. And so they create distance, emotional, physical, and psychological. That distance is their safety net. It's the only way they've learned to feel in control when intimacy feels threatening. And here's the key insight. They're not avoiding you. They're avoiding the parts of themselves they don't want you to activate. When someone starts to get close, when real intimacy begins to surface, an avoidant doesn't feel empowered. They feel vulnerable. They feel like they're losing the part of themselves that has always protected them. And rather than sit with that discomfort, they retreat. They'll rationalize this behavior. They'll say they just need space, or they're not ready for something serious, or that they're focusing on themselves. And maybe some of that is true. But beneath those words is a deeper emotional pattern they may not even be aware of. One where connection equals danger and closeness means inevitable disappointment or loss of self. What we mistake for someone having their emotions together is often someone who has learned to suppress, detach, or intellectualize their feelings as a coping mechanism. It's not strength, it's survival. And survival is often rigid, not resilient. So when you find yourself drawn to someone who keeps you at arm's length, who seems to flinch when you get emotionally close, understand this: you're not dealing with someone who's mastered their emotional world. You're dealing with someone who's been hurt by it. Their avoidance isn't a power move, it's a defense. And once you see that, the illusion of their emotional invincibility begins to fade. You stop putting them on a pedestal. You stop feeling less than for wanting connection. Because the real truth is, it takes far more courage to lean into intimacy than to run from it. And avoidants beneath the surface are often terrified of what that courage demands. Avoidants fear being truly seen, and that fear is often the hidden engine behind their most confusing behaviors. At first glance, they may seem confident, composed, even charismatic. They often present a version of themselves that appears independent and in control. But this version is carefully curated. It's a mask designed to maintain emotional distance while still engaging just enough to keep someone interested. What lies underneath isn't a lack of emotion. It's a fear of exposure. To be truly seen by another person means allowing them access to the parts of us we typically keep hidden. Our fears, our needs, our insecurities, and the emotional wounds we often try to suppress. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this kind of emotional exposure is deeply threatening. It makes them feel vulnerable, and vulnerability in their emotional experience is often tied to pain, rejection, or a loss of control. So they learn to protect themselves not by being honest about their feelings, but by keeping those feelings locked away. They may let you in just enough to spark hope, just enough to keep the connection alive, but they'll pull back the moment they sense that you're getting too close. This pullback isn't random or cold-hearted, it's instinctual. It's their nervous system trying to protect them from the perceived threat of emotional closeness. And ironically, the more genuine and emotionally available you are, the more unsafe they feel. Why? Because being around someone who is emotionally present forces them to confront the emotional parts of themselves they've buried. It shines a light on the things they've worked hard not to feel. Things like fear of abandonment, fear of being unworthy, or fear of needing someone and being disappointed. So when you show up fully, when you express your needs with clarity and love, when you offer steady intimacy, they don't feel comforted, they feel exposed. They feel like you see too much. And that's when the defenses kick in. They might criticize you, minimize your feelings, or suddenly withdraw. It's not because you've done something wrong, it's because you've done something right. You've created a space that invites real connection. But to them, real connection feels dangerous because it demands authenticity. And authenticity threatens the identity they've built around self-protection. Many avoidants grew up in environments where vulnerability wasn't safe, where emotional needs were dismissed or met with punishment. As adults, they carry that blueprint into their relationships. They may want love, they may crave closeness, but they fear the cost of being known. They don't want you to see the messy, unfiltered version of them, the one that's scared, flawed, and unsure. So they retreat into the version of themselves they can control. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing the behavior, but it gives you clarity. You begin to realize that when they distance themselves, it's not about your inadequacy. It's about their fear of intimacy. And when you grasp that, you stop trying to fix their discomfort by shrinking yourself. You start seeing their withdrawal not as a judgment on your worth, but as a reflection of their internal battle to stay hidden. The power in any dynamic with an avoidant shifts dramatically the moment you stop chasing. This is often the exact opposite of what your instincts tell you to do. When someone pulls away, especially someone you've grown emotionally attached to, your first reaction is usually to close the gap. You reach out, you over-explain, you try to get clarity, you try to fix it because you care, because you want connection, because it's painful to be left in limbo. But for avoidance, this is where they feel most in control. When you're doing all the emotional work, when you're the one trying to hold the relationship together, they thrive in emotional imbalance. It's not necessarily intentional or manipulative, but the pattern is consistent. When they feel you leaning in, they lean out. And when they sense your emotional availability, they respond by protecting their own. And if you're not careful, you'll end up in a dynamic where the harder you try to connect, the more they feel the need to create space. It becomes a painful cycle, one that leaves you constantly questioning your value and effort. But something powerful happens when you stop playing your part in that pattern. When you stop chasing calmly, not coldly, you shift the energy. You're no longer feeding the system that keeps them emotionally safe and you emotionally exhausted. You're choosing to step out of the role of the emotional caretaker and into the role of someone with boundaries, someone who understands their value, doesn't hinge on someone else's readiness or ability to love properly. Avoidants expect you to chase. They expect you to accommodate their distance with more effort. When you don't, it disorients them. Not because they're trying to manipulate you, but because the system they've unconsciously relied on is no longer working. It forces them to face the discomfort they've been trying to avoid, not yours, but their own. Your stillness acts as a mirror, reflecting back their behavior without interference. It also shows them something rare, emotional maturity. When you pull back, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, you communicate something very clearly. You're not here to perform for love. You're not here to win someone over. You're here for mutuality, for shared effort, for emotional presence. That's the real test. Anyone can show up when they're being pursued, but can they step forward when you stop pulling them? By removing your pursuit, you give space for their true intentions and emotional capacity to reveal themselves. Sometimes they step up. Often, they don't. Either way, you get clarity. Either way, you get your power back. And that power doesn't come from silence or withdrawal for the sake of control. It comes from choosing peace over pursuit. It comes from finally realizing that healthy connection doesn't require chasing. It requires choosing by both people, freely, willingly, and consistently. Understanding the behavior of an avoidant person changes everything. The moment you recognize their emotional distancing as a reflection of their own internal struggles, rather than a response to your value, you stop taking it personally. That shift in perspective is what disarms their power over you. Because what really gives avoidance control in a relationship is not their withdrawal, it's your interpretation of it. When they pull away and you feel abandoned, unworthy, or anxious, the power dynamic tips in their favor. You become consumed with trying to fix the connection or prove your worth, and they remain safely distant, unchallenged, and emotionally unaccountable. But when you see that their behavior isn't about you, that it's a coping strategy built on fear of intimacy, vulnerability, or past wounds, you remove the emotional hook. You stop internalizing their silence. You stop chasing their validation. And most importantly, you stop adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering their distance. You begin to see clearly this isn't a test of your worthiness, it's a pattern that belongs to them, and they've likely been repeating it long before you ever entered the picture. This understanding is powerful because it allows you to detach with grace instead of reacting with fear. You no longer spiral when they grow cold. You don't question if you were too much, too needy, too emotional. You recognize that healthy people don't punish others for emotional expression. They meet it with empathy and communication. Avoidants, on the other hand, often withdraw not because something is wrong with you, but because closeness brings up unresolved fear in them. The very intimacy you offer is the very thing they struggle to receive. Once you understand this, you also begin to hold yourself to a different standard. You realize that you are not responsible for managing someone else's fear of connection. You are not responsible for constantly adjusting yourself to keep someone emotionally comfortable. That's not love. It's self-abandonment. And when you stop doing that, you show up differently. You communicate more clearly. You ask for what you need, and you stop walking on emotional eggshells. Ironically, this shift often brings avoidance face to face with their own limitations. When you stop playing into the pattern, they're forced to confront it. Some will rise to the challenge and do the work. Others will retreat further. Either way, their power over your peace diminishes, because clarity kills confusion. And once you understand the truth of avoidant behavior, you stop trying to change it. You start choosing what you'll accept. True strength in a relationship doesn't come from clinging to someone in hopes they'll change. It comes from choosing yourself when someone refuses to meet you where you are. In dynamics with avoidant individuals, it's easy to confuse perseverance with love. You tell yourself that if you just prove your loyalty, stay patient enough, or show how different you are from the people who hurt them in the past, they'll finally feel safe enough to let you in. But that mindset traps you in a loop of emotional labor that never yields real intimacy. The harder you try to earn connection, the more you lose yourself. Avoidants aren't waiting for someone to chase them into healing. They're waiting for someone who will unknowingly validate their fear that closeness leads to pressure and loss of autonomy. When you cling to them, you reinforce that narrative. You think you're showing them what love is, but what you're really doing is teaching them that they don't need to grow, because you'll keep lowering your standards to maintain the connection. Choosing, on the other hand, requires courage. It means having the self-awareness to know what kind of relationship you want and the strength to walk away from one that can't give it to you. It's not about ultimatums. It's about truth. When you stop clinging, you stop negotiating your value. You say, this is how I want to be loved. This is how I want to feel. And if you can't show up that way, then this isn't for me. That clarity is what creates space for real connection, either with the avoidant person, if they're willing to step up, or with someone else who's ready from the start. You stop operating from fear of being alone, fear of missing out, fear of not being enough, and you start acting from worth. That shift is subtle, but it's powerful because it's no longer about how much they like you. It's about whether their actions are in alignment with the kind of relationship you want. Letting go of the need to convince someone to choose you doesn't mean giving up on love. It means refusing to beg for the bare minimum. It's understanding that relationships are about mutual effort, mutual respect, and mutual emotional safety. And if one person is doing all the work while the other avoids accountability, then that's not strength. That's self-sacrifice disguised as love. The real strength is in being willing to choose yourself, even if it means walking away. So let's be clear. Avoidants don't hold the power. They just hope you'll never realize you have it. The moment you stop interpreting their distance as a verdict on your worth and start seeing it as a reflection of their fears, the spell breaks. You stop playing a role in their story and start writing your own. Because understanding avoidant behavior isn't about diagnosing or fixing someone else. It's about liberating yourself. It's about recognizing that real love doesn't feel like emotional starvation. It feels safe. It feels mutual. It feels like home, not like a puzzle you're constantly trying to solve. If someone is unwilling or unable to meet you in the space of emotional honesty, that's not your burden to carry. That's your sign to step back and protect your peace. You deserve a love that doesn't require decoding. You deserve connection that invites you in, not one that punishes you for showing up. And if someone crumbles when they're asked to meet you in that space, then maybe it was never about keeping them. It was about finally keeping yourself. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for having the courage to face the truth, not just about others, but about what you truly deserve. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your energy, and never forget your worth. Goodbye, and thank you.